It's great that you're here, and wanted to talk to you about a few things, including our operating budget. Talk to you a little bit more about something that we've talked about a while ago, which was our county's drug overdose prevention plan and the challenges that we were facing with seeing our rising heroin epidemics throughout this country. Our steps for downtown Wheaton, and also about what's happening with some of the individual pieces of legislation that are being proposed here in the council. And so I'll start off with our operating budget. We continue to work with our various agencies and departments. One of the things that's been a topic of conversation continues to be education. And I want to be very clear about a great article that was written in the Gazette that talked about the challenges of maintenance of effort, but did want to make sure that folks understand this council is committed to doing whatever it needs to support education. The challenges, of course, are always our fiscal constraints. When the county executive sends over a budget that is balanced, requires us, if we are going to make additions, that we make cuts somewhere. And so we are actively making sure that we're working with our Board of Education, with our superintendent, to make sure that they understand that the fiscal constraints that we find ourselves in, and while we want to be supportive of all departments in terms of their asks and what they're looking to accomplish, at the same time, there are a lot of other challenges that we're facing in our budget as well. You've heard from Montgomery College in terms of their request in seeking approximately $8 million in additional funds in the operating budget. We've heard from a number of our nonprofit community that continues to ask for additional support. Those are indeed challenges, again, when you have a budget that is balanced that comes over and details a large number of priorities across a wide spectrum. And so it really makes it difficult for us to make significant changes without making some sort of reduction in some other sort of funding stream. And so we're very mindful of that. This is a delicate balance that we're trying to achieve. And so we continue to work through this, and hopefully towards the end of May, we'll have a budget that reflects the priorities of this county. I want to talk a little bit about our overdose prevention plan, because I think that that's extremely important for those that haven't heard. I actually had the pleasure of talking with Governor O'Malley last week on Wednesday about some of the challenges that we're facing regarding rising opioid, opiate, and heroin addiction throughout the state. And was talking with one of the leaders of Carroll County, a place that was, I think, number one in terms of deaths, as well as some of the challenges, and now I think just recently has dropped to number 2 in the state. However, is still facing some tremendous challenges in some of the things that they were doing there to help combat the problem. And I think that really what this boils down to is education. We saw that in terms of our conversation at our joint meeting with Public Safety and Health and Human Services. We have got to get the message out to our parents and to our community about the risks that continue to exist when it comes from the transition from prescription opioids and opiates to heroin, and the challenges of leaving prescription medications that are unused out. We'll be promoting our prescription take-back program heavily over these next few months to make sure that folks understand leaving these kinds of drugs in your cabinets with children in the house is a danger, and it's a problem waiting to happen. In addition, we need to make sure that we have robust treatment for not only adults, but also especially for our young adults and teens. And that was my conversation with the governor, asking him to support additional funding for Avery Road Treatment Facility. That is a place where we have paid very close attention to on the Health and Human Services Committee in making sure that that facility is brought up to speed in terms of the challenges that it faces. It's in very bad condition and not a place where a person would go to receive treatment and think that they're going to turn their lives around. Some of the conditions in the individual units there are at best deplorable, and so we really need to do something about that, and it's going to only happen with support of the state in putting additional money and funds into that facility. One of the accolades that we gave, and I think it's important to acknowledge, is that our school system is doing a very good job in understanding and trying to tackle this problem. I give credit to folks like Jennifer Webster, who's the principal at Damascus High School, who held a drug symposium and brought students as well as teachers, the police, Health and Human Services, members of the community, the faith community, all together to make sure that we acknowledge the fact that we are experiencing rises throughout the state, and how to help folks recognize what some of these symptoms are and how best to deal with approaching your child as well as treatment. And I think that overall, one of the things that was most striking about that conversation was one in which there was a parent that stood up and said that they had no idea that their child was using right under their nose. The reality is that as parents are busier in these times, aren't home that often, aren't spending that much time with their children because of workloads, our teachers and our school staff are spending more time with them than they spend with their parents. And so from that perspective, we talked about training and making sure that our teachers are well versed in terms of what the signs and symptoms are of drug addiction, and really making sure that that is a priority. And so I told folks at that Health and Human Services Committee, and I'll be talking with our legislators this summer about drafting legislation statewide that would mandate training for all of our teachers, along with their certification, that they actually receive training on how to identify some of the symptoms of drug addiction, and make that a mandatory part of their teacher training here in the state of Maryland. I think that it's important. I think that it's a priority, and I hope that there'll be delegates as well as the entire General Assembly that will support that initiative. We'll also be working with our Department of Health and Human Services on our school nurses that are county employees, making sure that we have the mandated training for them as well, so that they are up to speed in terms of the latest. As drug use changes and the methodologies of which people are using these drugs, we need to make sure that they know and are aware of all of the different ways and the symptoms and signs. And so we want to make sure that we are doing our part here in the county as well to make sure that we can help get our hands around this challenge. Last but not least, I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the economic development opportunities, including Wheaton, as well as others. We recently decided on the historic designation and not to do the historic designation for the Wheaton Community Center. And while I know that this was a concern for some in the community, I think that it strikes a balance. We need to understand that we need to deliver on amenities for this community that's been waiting for a very long time. But at the same time, we recognize that there are significant items, architecture that are a part of the Wheaton Community Center that we need to preserve. And so I look forward to working with our Department of General Services as well as the district council members and identifying some of those items so that they can be preserved in some sort of an archive within the new building, so that folks can recognize and appreciate some of the great things that have happened at the Wheaton Community Center, while still delivering on a 21st century building that gives the Wheaton community all the amenities that they need. The last item that I want to talk about, and then I'll open it up to questions, we continue to push our economic development initiatives here in the county. I had reported about some of the conversations we had with our Washington Metropolitan Regional Council Chairs meeting that recently took place, where Chair Mendelson from D.C., Chair Fassett from Arlington, Calvin Ball, Chair of the Howard County Council, and Mel Franklin, Chair of the Prince George's County Council, came together. One of the conversations that we've had, and I've now followed up with a number of others, including Mayor Yulee from Alexandria, is that the need for us to work together as a region when it comes to economic development issues. We all agree that it doesn't make sense for us to try and keep stealing business from each other instead of making sure that we are attractive as a region. And so this group has requested to meet again. We are currently looking at new dates in the next 2 months where we will reconvene. We have actually been requested by a few jurisdictions to open up invitations to them as well. So we will be including Fairfax in our next meeting also. I think that it's going to be extremely important for us as a whole to really start looking at this Washington metropolitan region as the next hot place for business and jobs to see growth. And I think that our community is ready. I think that our policies and procedures that we're looking at and working with the county executive in terms of streamlining procurement and fees highlights that we're ready. And I think the wherewithal is there. All of our jurisdictions understand that this is one of the top priorities that we're hearing from our constituents, and we really want to make sure that we're delivering on that. And so with that, I will open it up to questions. Ryan?
You said you talked to the governor about getting funding for the Avery Road Treatment Center. Would that be in the fiscal 15 budget or down the line?
The governor is actually, and I have to give him his credit, he's actually looking at a potential supplemental. Nothing's guaranteed yet, but the governor was actually very concerned about this issue and wasn't even aware of some of the challenges that we were facing in Montgomery. He was hearing about some of the challenges that Baltimore City is facing, some of the other Eastern Shore jurisdictions, but did not realize that we actually were seeing some of the increased numbers here in Montgomery County. And so from that perspective, it highlighted it even more so on his radar screen. And so I was appreciative of that, and I think that we'll really see some concrete numbers coming out of his office soon, because that was in his conversation with MACO, with the Maryland Association of Counties, in stating publicly his commitment for making sure that we could get something done here in the state and recognizing that this is a significant problem.
So it would be a supplemental appropriation for the fiscal 15 budget?
Yes. Yep.
And any idea how much money?
He hasn't highlighted that yet, but he mentioned a number of things that were important to him, including treatment as well as law enforcement, making sure that we had money for Narcan as well, so for the drug itself, to make sure that some of our first responders had access to it. So he was looking at it from a multifaceted approach, which I also appreciate, being able to have access to the drugs that can counteract the effects of heroin overdose are extremely important, as well as making sure that we can stamp out some of the criminals that are selling these drugs, like what we saw in Damascus Gardens. I had mentioned that initiative to him. Those are going to be extremely important as well in cutting off the pipeline that exists between Baltimore City coming down into some of the neighboring jurisdictions as well. The heroin pipeline is going to be extremely important. So he'd mentioned a number of those as potential funding sources.
Following up on that issue, I guess, have you had any discussions with Mayor Blake in Baltimore about how she's dealing with this issue and the role that the city plays in providing the heroin supply for the rest of the state?
Not yet, and I think that that's actually something that we talked about as a potential MACO topic as well. because this does affect the entire state. And so I think that one of the things that the governor had also mentioned, and then Michael Sanderson, executive director of MACO, had said that maybe it's a symposium that we need to hold at the upcoming MACO conference in August. And so I think that you'll probably see something as a result with that involves all aspects. So whether it's law enforcement, HHS, all coming together to really talk about what we're seeing in all of the neighboring jurisdictions, because I think that we're just not aware of what the other jurisdictions are doing, and also what's working, what's effective, as well as what the scope of the problem is. And I think that from there, in that collaboration aspect, we'll really be able to see some major things, major recommendations come out and major actions come out of that.
Any more information about a snow supplemental?
Not yet. We continue to experience snow in our region that I continue to highlight as unprecedented. You saw the recent article that came out in the Washington Post that had asked regional leaders to comment on promising to keep everything open if the snow was under 8 inches. And I think that the comments that came in behind that acknowledgement of why that would be extremely problematic and also challenging really kind of pokes holes into this assertion that we aren't doing what we should be when it comes to our reaction for snow. As you highlighted with the supplemental that will be coming, we've spent a great deal of money in reacting to these unprecedented snowstorms that we continue to receive. And I was just listening to the news, and they were talking about some flakes as a potential for either later on this week or next week, something along those lines. It's just getting out of control at this point. But I will remind folks that back in 2000, April 9th, 2000 to be exact, and the reason why I know that is because it was right after the day after my wife and I got married, we actually received a snowstorm that had enough snow that it shut down BWI Airport. The one time in which I've been able to prove to my wife that I was right and she was wrong is I booked our honeymoon flight for 8 o'clock in the morning, and we got out right before BWI had closed their airport. So just wanted to highlight that. Exactly. And now it's documented forever. No, but it really is important for us to get a handle on this snowstorm so we can learn from it. My hopes are that we never experience something like what we did this year, because it really is unprecedented. We see them from time to time, every 4 or 5 years or so. But when it comes to people that are asking about budgeting and whether or not we need to change our budgeting strategy, I mean, these are anomalies. These are things that are I don't think we'll see as the norm. When we look at our recent years in terms of snow, it's been minimal at best. And so as a person who's an avid snowboarder and snow lover, the only unfortunate thing for me is that I ended up being council president in a year in which we had the most snow. So.
On the Wheaton Rec Center and the decision not to designate it, what role do you see the new project playing in the economic development process in Wheaton, and along with the plan that the council passed back in the fall?
Well, I think that overall, a lot of the decisions that we make themselves on face value don't necessarily mean that all of a sudden something's going to happen. But it changes the dialogue. It changes the perception about a particular area when you start to talk about development and what's going to happen in that region. It gives people a different mindset. People that were considering thinking about Wheaton as a place for them to set up their business had always perceived it as being old, tired. I mean, those are words that I've heard growing up here and living right down the street from Wheaton. And that's going to change. And I think with that, then the perception of Wheaton changes, and then you start to see more of those economic development opportunities. You see more people believing in the community, thinking about locating there. Those are the kinds of things that we want to continue to see happen. We want to give people the promise of seeing that, these particular areas are going to be places where they want to live, work, play, experience the great things that come along with having a park and a regional facility where you can go and enjoy green space, and you can go and have fun with your kids and play outside and have recreation programs. I mean, those are things that are extremely important to our community, right? And so from that perspective, I really think that it's changing the dialogue about Wheaton that really makes the most difference. It's not as if that one building is going to all of a sudden then, mean that buildings are going to build up next to it or something along those lines. That's not the case. But what it does do is it really changes, what people are saying about Wheaton.
Clarksburg's on the agenda tomorrow. Any comments?
I don't think that there's anyone who's said that there's going to be any change in terms of what the council's straw votes are. I think that the council made a strong step forward in terms of saying that this is the direction that we wanted to go in terms of both trying to balance the needs of Clarksburg development with the press for making sure that we're protecting the environment. And so I think that there's no one that's approached me, and I've asked members if they had ideas or concerns that they would approach me so that we'd be aware, and I haven't been approached by anybody who's looking to do anything different from what our straw votes that we've already taken are. So I think we'll be moving forward with solidifying that plan tomorrow. All right. Well, thank you very much, guys. Look forward to next week.